If you have any questions or I would invite you to come to the microphone. Si vous avez des questions, je vous invite à venir vers le microphone. Oui, absolument.
Yeah, I'd also like to ask Mark to stay up here, and I'd like to ask Fred to come up, because I think that they have a much better perspective on the Canadian angle to these issues than I do.
Alors, s'il vous plaît, si c'est possible, d'être le plus succinct possible, d'aller directement à la question. Et if you can possibly just be as succinct as possible, go directly to the question, and maybe ask the proper question, whatever. Just go ahead. Sorry.
Can I ask 2 questions?
We'll start with the first one.
Mr. Bauer, which countries, according to your opinion, are faring better at realizing the potential threat that's here?
Which countries are
faring better at realizing the menace that is present?
I think the one country. Oh, no, listen to this. No, I'm gone. This is great. I think the one country in Western Europe. No, it's too loud, isn't it? The one country in Western Europe that really is starting to, at the very least, starting to get its act together on these issues is Denmark. Now, after there was several years ago, there was a survey in Denmark that was a study, rather, that was done in Denmark showing that, I think it was by the year 2050, if I'm not mistaken, that the Muslim population of Denmark, if present trends continued, would be extremely high. I don't remember exactly what the figure was, but it was a high enough figure to strike terror into the minds of a lot of people in that country. And in the next election, the Socialist Party, which had been in charge of that country for a very, very long time, was voted out. The new prime minister was a man named Anders Fogh Rasmussen, who very courageously began to introduce certain reforms in immigration and certain more stringent requirements that would lead to integration. And as a reward for this, he was vilified throughout Western Europe by politicians and by his political opponents in his country, and of course by the media in his own country for the most part. But he has introduced, for example, something called the 24-year law, which addresses the fact that most of the Muslim immigration to Europe comes through marriage. A Muslim in Europe marries a Muslim back in the country of origin. This accounts for a very, very high percentage of marriages by Muslims in Europe. In some cases, 80, 90 or more percent. And in the great majority of these cases, these people are marrying their first cousins. And the whole purpose of the marriage, these are forced marriages, and the purpose is to bring more and more members of the family to Europe so that they can enjoy the economic benefits of it, and so forth. And the purpose of this law was to try to stem that. And the idea was they were marrying off girls and boys who were 16, 17 years old, in some cases younger. And the law says both parties to one of these marriages have to be 24 years old if they want to live in Denmark together. This has really made a major difference. The idea being that by the time a young person is 24 years old, perhaps they've gotten an education, perhaps they've developed some sense of independence, perhaps they've got more of a sense of their rights than they did when they were 15 or 16, and they're more in a position to stand up to their parents and say, I'm not going to marry this person. Maybe they will already have fallen in love with somebody and will be able to work something out. This has worked. This has worked to a very good extent. Denmark has also simply shifted its arrangements in the places it takes in immigrants from. It's not taking in fewer immigrants, it's taking them from different places. And this is making quite a difference. It's perhaps not as strong a set of measures as it could be, but it's far better than what any other country in Western Europe is doing.
Interesting. My second question is out of curiosity. Have you been briefed or are you informed of what has transpired here? We've had a debate in recent years about what we call reasonable accommodations. Have you been, do you have some knowledge of that? Have you been briefed on that?
I've been in Canada for a few days now, and my head has been about to explode about 50 times. I have learned things that I really had no idea about. I mean, I've concentrated on Western Europe and to some extent on the United States, and I really had no idea of the extent to which things here were going to hell in a handbasket. And if somebody else doesn't write about it, I'm going to.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Some conservative heads of state in Europe, like Nicolas Sarkozy and Angela Merkel, who generally have taken a relatively hard line on Islamism, seem to be pandering to their respective Muslim communities when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There's an inordinate amount of pressure now on Israel to curb settlement activity, and yet Sarkozy and Merkel seem to be very adamant on prohibiting, the burkini and these other point-by-point things you were talking about, Islamism imposing itself on the society. What do you think is going on?
Well, I think that Sarkozy and Merkel have talked a good game in some cases, and Sarkozy has, for example, he's made efforts to crack down on illegal immigration. Illegal immigration is really not the problem. The problem is so much legal immigration, and I haven't seen him taking steps of the kind that, as I said, or Denmark has undertaken to try to change that around. I mean, France has the highest percentage of Muslims of any country in Western Europe, and it has terrible and increasingly dire problems. And he has been talking out of both sides of his mouth, actually, in some cases. I mean, he's been talking, at one point he was talking about a Mediterranean Union with France at its head, and it would be some kind of supplementary thing to the European Union, and it would include all the countries of the Maghreb, of North Africa, and it just sounded like a new version of idiotic policies that his predecessors had been talking about, which led to the problem that they have now in the first place. So there has been a movement to the right, and I've written about this in Western European politics, but to a large extent, the result of the election of people like Sarkozy and Merkel has been a lot of talk and not as much action as one would have hoped, I'm afraid. Did you want to add something? Yeah.
Just one thing I would add is that when it comes to Israel, that's the one area where you have the ultimate coalition of left and Islamists working together. In the absence of huge Muslim immigration, you would still have this huge pressure to abandon Israel from the left.
Vous me permettrez de poser la question en français. Je crois que Marc Lebuy, on va faire la traduction. Donc, vous proposez une critique, qu'on pourrait dire une critique libérale du multiculturalisme, c'est-à-dire une critique tout à fait légitime